The headline was stark: Amelia Vance, CEO of Vance Industries, still missing, presumed dead after tragic car accident. Lucas, with his perfectly coiffed dark hair and a jawline that could have been carved from marble, was the picture of a charming groom. Yet, his hand, though holding hers, felt distant, a ceremonial gesture more than a loving touch. His eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of a genuine, tender emotion, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold glares of his family. Clara's hand trembled as she read the article, and a rush of memories, long buried under the haze of amnesia, flooded her mind. The Sterling mansion, Lucas, the abuse, the streets, it all came into focus, not as her life story, but as a bizarre, cruel interlude. Her name wasn't Clara, it was Amelia Vance. She was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, not a beggar bride. The article explained that she had disappeared after a severe car crash that had left her with a partial amnesia, disoriented and confused. Eleanor Sterling, Lucas's mother, was a formidable woman whose silver hair was as sharp and unforgiving as her gaze. She sat at the head table, her posture ramrod straight, every inch of her a testament to her disdain. She had made it clear to anyone who would listen that this wedding was a travesty, a stain on the Sterling name. Her son, Lucas, was the heir to a modest but respected family business, and he deserved a bride with pedigree, not a beggar from a forgotten corner of the city. Clara, orphaned and raised in an orphanage, had no family name to offer, no inheritance to sweeten the deal. She was a blank slate, and to Eleanor, that was an unforgivable sin. Tears, not of sadness but of disbelief and relief, streamed down her face. Martha, seeing her distress, rushed over. "What is it, dear? Are you all right?" Beside Eleanor sat Jessica, Lucas's younger sister. Jessica was a caricature of her mother's vanity, all sharp edges and sneers. She had spent the entire reception whispering to her friends, pointing at Clara's modest dress and mocking the lack of a prominent family on the bride's side of the room. Clara's only guests were a few kind-hearted women from the orphanage who had watched her grow, their presence a quiet testament to her true character. But to the Sterlings, they were just further evidence of her lowly status. Clara, unable to speak, simply pointed to the newspaper. Martha's eyes widened in shock as she read the story. Amelia Vance. The Amelia Vance. She gasped. "My goodness. Child, the world has been looking for you." Eleanor is just beside herself. Clara overheard one of the Sterling family friends whisper, "She can't believe Lucas went through with it. That girl is going to be a burden on them." Suddenly, a well-dressed man burst through the door of the bakery. He looked exhausted, his eyes scanning the faces of the patrons with a desperate hope. He saw Clara, his eyes catching on the newspaper in her hand, and his face contorted in a mixture of shock and profound relief. It was her personal assistant, a man she now remembered as Mr. Harrison. He had been searching for her for months, following every lead, and had finally found a faint trail leading to Martha's corner of the city. The words, though not meant for her ears, stung like a physical blow. Clara's heart ached not for herself, but for the loss of a dream she had held dear. She had believed in Lucas's love, had foolishly hoped that his family would see her for who she was, not where she came from. She had imagined a life where she could be a loving wife and a part of a family. But every glance, every whispered comment, every cutting remark from Eleanor and Jessica chipped away at that hope. The reunion was a whirlwind of emotion and disbelief. Mr. Harrison explained that the Sterling family had conveniently found her, with her amnesia and a false name, and had taken advantage of her vulnerable state. They had married her to Lucas, knowing she was a blank slate, hoping to use her for some unknown purpose. The locket was likely a manufactured excuse to get rid of her when she became too much of a liability, or when Lucas's feelings for her complicated their plans. The toast was a masterclass in passive aggression. Eleanor raised her glass with a brittle smile. "To Lucas," she said, her eyes never leaving Clara's. "May he find the strength to lead our family, and may he remember his duties, even when they are unexpected." The implication was clear. Clara was an unexpected duty, a mistake to be tolerated. Amelia Vance was back. She was no longer a timid, amnesiac Clara, a beggar bride cast out into the streets. She was a woman of immense power and intellect, and the fire of injustice, once a searing pain, now forged her spirit into an unyielding steel. She looked at Martha, her face filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice now strong and clear. "You saved my life." Lucas, finally catching her eye, squeezed her hand. It was a fleeting, silent apology for his mother's cruelty. But it was not enough. He was a man torn between the woman he loved and the family he feared. His weakness was a chasm opening up between them. And Clara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the wedding of scorn was only the beginning. The honeymoon would be over before it even began, and the Sterling Manor, with its polished marble floors and its cold, judgmental eyes, would be her gilded cage. Life in the Sterling mansion was not a home for Clara. It was a constant performance of servitude. The initial humiliation of the wedding was just a prelude to the daily indignities she would endure. The polished marble floors that had seemed so grand now felt like a cold, unforgiving stage where she was the lone, uncredited actress in a play of her own suffering. As Amelia stepped into a waiting town car, her gaze fell upon the Sterling mansion in the distance, a dark, imposing silhouette against the city lights. The time for sorrow and despair was over. The time for a reckoning had begun. The world of high finance and corporate maneuvering, once a distant echo in Amelia's fractured memory, was now her reality once more. She was back in the penthouse office of Vance Industries, a gleaming citadel of glass and steel that overlooked the entire city. The silence of the office was a stark contrast to the clatter of the Sterling kitchen and the constant, biting remarks of Eleanor and Jessica. Here, she was a queen, and her word was law. Eleanor and Jessica seemed to take a perverse pleasure in turning her into their personal maid. "Clara, the guest rooms need to be spotless before the bridge club arrives," Eleanor would command, her voice as sharp as broken glass. Or, "The silver is looking a bit dull. Clara, a Sterling bride should know how to properly polish her family's heirlooms." Jessica would sneer, her words laced with the venom of her mother's approval. Amelia, now fully recovered and sharper than ever, wasted no time. Her first order of business was to quietly gather information on the Sterling family and their business. With her extensive network and access to corporate intelligence, it was an easy task. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The Sterling family business was not the modest but respected enterprise they had claimed. It was a failing company on the verge of bankruptcy, a house of cards built on deceit and shady deals. The financial troubles, she realized, were the true motive behind their cruelty. They had hoped to use her, a seemingly helpless woman with no past, as a pawn to secure a last-ditch investment, a lifeline to save their drowning company. The marriage was a cynical business transaction, and the Lockett incident a desperate attempt to get rid of her when their plan began to unravel. Clara's hands, once accustomed to the simple, honest work of the orphanage, became raw and chapped from endless cleaning. She cooked their meals, washed their clothes, and tended to the vast garden, all while wearing the same simple dresses that had earned her their ridicule. They refused to buy her new clothes, insisting she was already far too expensive a mistake. Her every action was scrutinized, her every mistake a cause for public humiliation. The injustice of it all, the cold-hearted manipulation, the years of torment she had endured for their greed, fueled a fire in Amelia that was both righteous and powerful. She wasn't just planning revenge, she was planning a strategic dismantling of their lives. A quiet, precise corporate war that would leave them with nothing. She started by subtly influencing the stock market, shorting their shares, and buying up their competitors. She used her influence to block their loan applications and expose their fraudulent activities to regulatory bodies. Lucas, her husband, was her greatest disappointment. In the privacy of their room, he would sometimes hold her, his touch a silent acknowledgement of her pain. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he would whisper, but the words were hollow. He never defended her in front of his family. He never stood up to his mother's cruelty. He was a spectator to her abuse, a bystander in his own home. His love, if it was indeed love, was a fragile thing, easily broken by his family's disapproval. Amelia worked tirelessly with her legal team, meticulously building a case against the Sterlings. She was no longer the quiet, timid Clara. She was a CEO on a mission, her mind a steel trap, her eyes fixed on the target. She had endured their abuse, their taunts, and their lies. Now, it was their turn to feel the heat. She was a phoenix, rising from the ashes of her past, and she was ready to unleash her power. Clara learned to exist in the margins of the Sterling mansion. She became a ghost, moving silently through the halls, her face a mask of polite indifference. Her past, her quiet strength, her true identity, it all remained a carefully guarded secret. The Sterlings had no interest in her history, only in her present servitude. She was a beggar bride, and they were determined to keep her that way. Her isolation was complete. There was no one to turn to, no one to confide in, and no one to defend her. The gilded cage was slowly turning into a tomb, and Clara, with her quiet resilience, was burying a part of herself with each passing day. The Sterling family's cruelty was a slow-burning fire, but the day it finally consumed her was swift and merciless. It began, as all their attacks did, with a subtle shift in the air, a sharpening of Eleanor's gaze and a venomous glint in Jessica's eyes. A week before, Eleanor had proudly displayed a magnificent, antique silver locket, a family heirloom passed down through generations. It was a piece of ornate artistry, its delicate filigree, and a single, stunning sapphire, a testament to the Sterling family's long-held prosperity. Clara had only seen it from a distance, polishing the display case in which it was kept. Her plan culminated in a grand gala, a public spectacle designed to draw out her enemies and expose their weakness. The event was a celebration of Vance Industries' unprecedented success, a dazzling display of wealth and power, the kind of event the Sterlings, in their desperation, would be unable to resist. Amelia knew they would be there, hungry for an opportunity, hoping to find a wealthy investor to bail them out. They would walk into the lion's den, completely unaware that the woman they had cast out, the beggar bride they had humiliated, was the very lioness waiting for them. On a Tuesday morning, with Lucas away on a business trip, Eleanor's piercing shriek echoed through the mansion. "The locket, it's gone!" she cried, her voice a mix of feigned panic and theatrical rage. The servants were immediately gathered, a line of trembling faces awaiting judgment. But Eleanor's eyes, cold and calculating, bypassed them all, settling on Clara with a terrifying certainty. The stage was set, the trap was laid, and the countdown to the final act of her retribution had begun. The grand ballroom of the Vance Industries Tower was a dazzling spectacle of crystal chandeliers, sparkling champagne, and the city's elite, Eleanor and Jessica Sterling, dressed in gowns that strained to project an air of old money they no longer possessed, moved through the crowd with forced smiles. They were like two starving wolves in a palace of plenty, desperate to find a financier who could save their crumbling empire. They hadn't seen Lucas all evening, but they were too focused on their prey to care. "Clara," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "Where is it?" Suddenly, a hush fell over the room. A spotlight hit the top of the grand staircase, and a figure emerged, an impossibly elegant woman in a shimmering midnight blue gown. She descended with the grace of a queen, her hair a cascade of dark silk, her face a perfect mask of confidence and power. It was Amelia. Clara, who had just finished dusting the library, froze. I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Sterling." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Sterlings, standing near the staircase, froze. Eleanor's face went white, her jaw slack. Jessica, always quick to recover, managed a sneer. "What's that beggar girl doing here? Has she come to clean the floors?" "Don't play coy with me," Jessica interjected, stepping forward. "We all know your type. You saw a chance to grab some wealth and you took it." Amelia reached the bottom of the stairs, her gaze locking onto the Sterlings. "I believe you're mistaken," she said, her voice clear and resonant, echoing through the now silent room. "My name is Amelia Vance, and I am the host of this evening's event." "How dare you!" Clara cried, her quiet demeanor finally cracking under the weight of the baseless accusation. "I didn't touch it. I wouldn't." The shock was palpable. The crowd murmured, their eyes darting between the radiant Amelia and the ashen-faced Sterlings. Eleanor, finally finding her voice, stammered, You can't be Clara. You were Clara." Eleanor's lips curled into a cruel smile. "A beggar always stays a beggar. Clara, you think you can escape your past with a wedding ring? You were looking for a way to pawn it off, weren't you? To get back to the gutters you came from?" Amelia's lips curled into a cold, knowing smile. "Clara was a victim of amnesia, a victim you and your daughter took advantage of. A victim you framed for a crime she didn't commit. She paused, letting the words sink in. The heirloom you accused me of stealing. The magnificent locket. She motioned to a projector screen behind her, and an image of the locket appeared. I believe you'll find it here, she said. And the image zoomed in on a hidden compartment in the Sterling Mansion's grand piano. It was never stolen. You simply hid it. As a pretext to throw me out, they led her to her room, a small, sparsely furnished space that was a world away from the luxury of the rest of the mansion. Eleanor and Jessica began to ransack her few belongings. They tore apart her small closet, threw her books to the floor, and even upended her small box of keepsakes from the orphanage. They found nothing, of course, but proof was never what they were after. The accusation itself was the weapon. Jessica shrieked, "That's a lie! You can't prove anything!" "This is a disgrace!" Eleanor declared, throwing a small, uncalled, worn photograph of Clara's orphanage friends on the floor. "And we will not tolerate a thief in this family. Get out!" But Amelia was ready. Her assistant, Mr. Harrison, walked onto the stage, holding a series of legal documents. These documents detail the fraudulent business practices of the Sterling family business, he announced, his voice steady. And the full report has been sent to the appropriate authorities. Your company is officially under investigation, and your assets are being frozen as we speak. Jessica grabbed Clara's arm, her nails digging into her skin. You have 5 minutes to pack your things. Not that you have much to pack, you worthless scrounger. Eleanor, defeated, looked around the room, her empire crumbling around her. She turned her tear-filled eyes to Lucas, who had just walked into the room, his face a mixture of anguish and confusion. Lucas, darling, tell her we did this for you. Clara stood numbly, tears streaming down her face, a silent protest against the brutal injustice. The truth, her innocence, meant nothing to them. They were not seeking a lost locket. They were seeking an excuse to be rid of her. She looked at the door, hoping, praying that Lucas would walk through it, that he would be her savior. But he was miles away, and her pleas to call him were met with cruel laughter. But Lucas shook his head. No, Mother. You did this for yourselves. He looked at Amelia, his gaze filled with a pain she hadn't seen since the day she was kicked out. He walked toward her, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I didn't steal the locket. Amelia, I was trying to find it, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I knew they had hidden it. I was too afraid to stand up to them. I was too weak. In a flurry of fury and self-righteousness, they dragged her out of the mansion. The night air was cold and biting, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the house. They threw her one small bag, containing a change of clothes and her precious books, onto the lawn. Don't ever show your face here again, Eleanor sneered. Consider this your divorce. The truth was a stunning twist. Lucas was not a monster, just a coward. His love for her had been real, but his fear of his family had been stronger. The revelation didn't excuse his actions, but it explained them. Amelia's expression softened, a flicker of the old Clara returning. But it was quickly replaced by the steely resolve of Amelia Vance. As the heavy oak doors of the Sterling mansion slammed shut, Clara was left alone on the sidewalk, the cold streetlights illuminating her raw, tear-streaked face. Her heart was a shattered mess, not from the loss of a home she never truly had, but from the realization that Lucas, the man she had loved, had not been there to save her. He had been a willing spectator to her ruin, and that betrayal hurt more than any cruel word or false accusation. The gilded cage had not just opened, it had violently ejected her, and now she was truly, utterly alone, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the bitter taste of injustice on her tongue. The cold asphalt of the street was a shocking change from the soft rugs and polished floors of the Sterling mansion. Clara walked, or rather, stumbled, through the desolate night, the weight of her small bag feeling like an anchor around her neck. The city, which she had once viewed from the sterile windows of her gilded cage, was now a harsh, unforgiving reality. The vibrant lights and sounds she had only glimpsed now felt menacing, the shadows they cast, long and threatening. She was a ghost in the city she had never truly known, with a face that was still a child's, and a heart that was now old and weary. Your cowardice cost me my home, my identity, and my peace, she said, her voice firm. but you will find your own justice in the end. The public shaming of the Sterlings was swift and brutal. The next morning, the headlines screamed of fraud, corporate misconduct, and the shocking return of Amelia Vance. The Sterling family business, already on the brink of collapse, was now in free fall. Eleanor and Jessica were publicly disgraced, their names synonymous with greed and cruelty. Lucas, now separated from his family's toxic influence, found himself adrift, his life's ambitions shattered. He had lost everything, but he had finally found his courage. He started from scratch, taking a low-paying job, determined to rebuild his life on his own terms. An honest man who had learned a hard lesson. The first few days were a blur of hunger, fear, and a profound loneliness that gnawed at her soul. She slept in alleyways, huddled against the cold concrete, her small bag of belongings clutched tightly to her chest. The clothes on her back were a constant source of shame, a painful reminder of a life she no longer had. The few dollars she had managed to save were quickly spent on stale bread and a bottle of water. She felt her hope, a fragile thing to begin with, slowly dissolving into the concrete dust. Amelia, now fully in charge of Vance Industries, didn't forget her past, the Clara part of her life. The pain and the kindness she had found on the streets had fundamentally changed her. She used her immense platform to launch a new foundation, the Martha Foundation, named in honor of the kind woman who had saved her. The foundation was dedicated to helping the homeless and creating second chances for those who had fallen on hard times. Martha, now a beloved figure in the city, became the foundation's honorary chairwoman. One afternoon, rummaging through a dumpster behind a bustling cafe, she found a plastic bottle. The thought of earning a few cents by recycling it sparked an idea, a tiny ember of resilience in the vast darkness of her despair. She began to wander the streets, a quiet figure sifting through trash cans, her eyes trained on the gleaming promise of plastic and aluminum. It was grueling, dirty work, but with each bottle she collected, she felt a flicker of pride. She was a survivor, not a victim. The Sterlings had called her a beggar, and now, by a cruel twist of fate, she had become one. But her spirit was not broken. Amelia's journey was a testament to the power of resilience and the unwavering pursuit of justice. She had been a beggar bride, a forgotten woman, but she had risen from the ashes to become a queen, a CEO who used her power not just for profit, but for good. She was no longer defined by the Sterling family's cruelty, but by her own strength and her newfound purpose. It was during one of these tireless hunts that she met Martha. Clara was shivering on a park bench, the cold wind cutting through her thin clothes, when an elderly woman with kind, weary eyes sat down beside her. Martha was a regular fixture in the park, a woman who had seen the best and worst of the city's streets. She didn't look down at Clara's dirt-stained hands or her tired face. Instead, she offered her a warm, homemade sandwich wrapped in a napkin. The final scene of the story is of Amelia standing on the balcony of her penthouse, looking out at the city lights. She is not alone. Mr. Harrison is by her side, a loyal confidant. And Martha, now in a beautiful home bought for her by Amelia, is a frequent visitor. The scars of her past are still there, a reminder of what she had to endure, but they no longer define her. She has found her true self, her purpose, and her home. "You look like you could use this," Martha said, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Clara, too stunned to speak, took the sandwich. The warmth of the bread was a comfort she hadn't felt in weeks, and the simple act of kindness brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below." Martha smiled, a network of wrinkles around her eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "What's a girl like you doing out here all alone?" she asked, her tone not one of judgment, but of genuine concern. Clara, for the first time in months, found herself opening up. She didn't tell her the whole story, but she told her enough about being alone, about having nowhere to go. Martha, in turn, told her about her small, cozy apartment above a small bakery, and how she sometimes had an extra bed for those in need. That night, Clara had her first good night's sleep in weeks. The simple, clean bed and the warmth of Martha's small home were a stark contrast to the Sterling mansion's grandeur. There, she had been a ghost, a servant. Here, she was a person. Martha's kindness was a life raft in an ocean of despair, and with each passing day, it mended the broken pieces of Clara's heart. She had found an ally, a friend, and a reason to keep going. The world wasn't all cold marble and cruel glares. There was kindness to be found, and it was in the most unexpected of places. The world had been a monochrome blur of exhaustion and despair. But in Martha's small apartment, colors slowly began to return. Clara was no longer just surviving, she was starting to live again. She helped Martha with her bakery, kneading dough with a renewed sense of purpose, her hands now busy with creation instead of cleaning. She spent her free moments reading the few books she had salvaged from the mansion, and in the quiet evenings, she and Martha would talk for hours about life, kindness, and resilience. It was on a particularly slow afternoon at the bakery that a discarded briefcase caught her eye. It was lying in a trash pile on the street corner. A dark, leather thing, waterlogged and forgotten. A strange curiosity compelled her to retrieve it. Inside, soaked but surprisingly intact, was a newspaper. She began to idly sort through the damp pages, her mind wandering, when a headline jumped out at her. Her heart stopped. It was her own face staring back from the page, a professional portrait she hadn't seen in years. The air in the grand ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and the unspoken weight of judgment. Clara stood beside Lucas Sterling, her hand trembling slightly in his. The crisp white of her borrowed wedding gown felt like a costume, and the intricate lace collar, a noose. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, a union of two souls. Instead, it was a public spectacle of her supposed unworthiness.